In a quiet suburban town where the days passed slowly and people lived simple lives, there was a young woman named Alina, who spent most of her time working at a small cafe near the train station. She wasn't famous or wealthy. To most people, she was just the polite girl behind the counter who served coffee with a gentle smile. But deep inside her heart, there was a secret world, a world built around music, rhythm, and dreams that once burned brightly before life got in the way. When she was a little girl, music had been everything to her. Her parents used to tell stories about how she would crawl up to the old family piano, tapping random keys until they made a melody. Her father, though not a musician himself, bought her a used upright piano when she turned 7. The keys were worn and a few didn't play right, but to her it was a treasure. Every evening after school, she would sit in front of it, practicing scales and simple tunes until her fingers ached. Her dream was to one day play on a grand stage where lights would shine down on her, and people would listen not just to her notes but to her heart. For years, she worked hard, practicing for hours. Her teachers often said she had a rare gift, a natural ability to express emotion through her playing. But just when everything seemed to be going right, life took a turn. Her father's small business began to struggle. Bills piled up and her mother fell sick for a while. There was no money left for music lessons or competitions, so Alina made the only choice she could. She stepped away from her piano dream to help her family. It was one of the hardest decisions of her life. She remembered sitting in her room, looking at her piano and promising herself that she'd return to it one day. But as years went by, that promise grew fainter. Life kept moving forward and she followed along. After finishing school, she found a job at the cafe, serving people who barely looked up from their phones. The job was tiring but steady, and she learned to find comfort in small things: warm coffee in the morning, a friendly customer, the sound of rain on the roof during her breaks. Still, every time she heard piano music, whether in a commercial, a movie, or from someone's phone, something inside her stirred. It was like an ache that never really went away. Late at night, when she walked home past the quiet streets, she often found herself humming melodies she once knew by heart. One evening, while walking home after a long shift, she noticed a light coming from the window of the community center near the park. She had walked past that building hundreds of times, but that night, something made her stop. The sound of a piano echoed faintly through the glass. It wasn't a perfect performance, the keys were slightly out of tune, but the melody was soft and beautiful. She couldn't resist. She pushed the door open and peeked inside. The room was nearly empty except for an old upright piano sitting in the corner. The janitor, an older man she'd seen around town, noticed her and smiled. "You play?" he asked casually, noticing her interest. She hesitated, unsure if she should say yes. It had been years since her fingers had touched the keys, but curiosity won. She nodded shyly. The man waved toward the piano. "Go ahead. It's just gathering dust these days." Alina walked slowly toward it. The piano looked ancient, its wooden frame scratched, a few keys yellowed with age. But when she sat down and pressed the first note, a flood of memories rushed back. Her hands trembled at first, her fingers unsure. But soon, as she began to play a simple lullaby she had learned as a child, everything around her disappeared. The sound of her music filled the empty hall, echoing softly off the walls. It wasn't perfect. Some notes sounded dull and she made small mistakes, but she didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt alive again. When she finished, she sat there for a long moment, just listening to the silence that followed. The janitor clapped gently from across the room. "You've still got it," he said with a grin. She smiled, a little embarrassed. "It's been so long," she admitted. "I didn't think I could still play." "Come by any time," he said. "No one uses it anyway." That became the start of something new. Every few evenings after work, she would stop by the community center. Sometimes she played old songs she remembered. Other times she made up new melodies of her own. The music became her quiet escape from the noise of life. No one else knew about it. It was her secret. As weeks turned into months, her playing grew stronger again. Her fingers regained their flow, and her emotions poured through the keys more naturally than ever before. Some nights the janitor would sit and listen. Occasionally a passerby would stop at the door, drawn by the sound. But most of the time it was just her and the piano, a world where time stood still. One evening, as she played a calm, emotional tune, An elderly woman entered quietly and listened for a few minutes. When Alina finished, the woman approached her with a warm smile. "That was beautiful, dear," she said softly. "You play with such feeling." "Thank you," Alina replied, blushing a little. "Would you consider playing at the train station next weekend?" The woman asked. "We're hosting a small event there, something we call Talent on the Platform. It's meant to bring a bit of art into everyday life. You could play something simple. People love familiar tunes." The offer caught Alina by surprise. She had never played publicly since her teenage years. The thought of performing in front of strangers again made her stomach twist. She smiled politely and said she'd think about it. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, her mind spinning with thoughts. What if she embarrassed herself? What if she froze up? But another part of her, the part that still dreamed of music, whispered something different. What if this is your chance? The next day at work she couldn't focus. She kept thinking about the piano, about how good it felt to play again. By the end of her shift, she had made up her mind. She went back to the community center, found the woman, and told her yes, she would do it. The woman was thrilled. "Wonderful. Just something light and cheerful, dear. A simple tune everyone can enjoy." Over the next few days, Alina practiced after work, focusing on easy pieces she knew by heart. She wanted to keep it simple, just like the woman had said. But even as she played those simple tunes, she couldn't help adding her own touch. Small changes in rhythm, gentle transitions, little bursts of feeling that made the music her own. As the day of the event drew closer, her nerves began to grow. She hadn't performed in years. Every time she imagined sitting in front of a crowd, her hands would tremble. But she told herself she could do it. After all, it wasn't a big concert, just a few people at a train station. On the morning of the event, she stood by her mirror, staring at her reflection. She wore a simple white blouse and a long blue skirt, her hair tied neatly. She didn't look like a performer, just an ordinary young woman. Yet deep inside, her heart beat with a mixture of fear and excitement. When she finally reached the train station, she saw a small crowd gathered near the platform. A few other performers were already there, some singing, some playing instruments. At the far end stood an upright piano, polished and shining under the bright lights. She felt a lump in her throat as she approached it. The organizer smiled at her warmly. "You must be Alina, don't worry, just relax. Play something nice and simple. People here appreciate sincerity more than perfection." She nodded, but her palms were already sweating. As she waited for her turn, she looked around. People were chatting, scrolling on their phones, buying tickets. No one seemed to care much about the performers. And yet a small spark of hope flickered inside her. Maybe, just maybe, this was her moment to reconnect with the part of herself she had almost forgotten. When her name was finally called, she walked to the piano, her heart pounding. She sat down slowly, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a deep breath. Then her fingers touched the keys. The sound that came out was soft and delicate, just a simple tune like she had promised. But in that moment, something inside her began to stir again. The years of silence, the buried dreams, the quiet passion, all of it started to rise within her as her hands moved across the keys. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning of something that would soon change everything in her life. That morning at the train station felt like a dream to Alina. She could hear the low hum of trains, the echo of footsteps on the platform, and the constant chatter of people waiting to board. The smell of coffee mixed with the scent of rain that had fallen earlier. She stood near the old upright piano, her hands slightly trembling as she watched others perform before her. Some sang tearful songs, others played the guitar or read poetry. People clapped politely, but most were too busy with their phones or luggage to really notice what was happening. Alina felt her heart race faster as her turn came closer. The announcer smiled and called her name softly through the microphone, telling the small crowd that the next performer would be playing a piano piece. Her legs felt weak for a moment, and she almost thought of backing out. But something inside her whispered that she had to do this, not for fame, not for anyone else, but for herself. As she walked toward the piano, she could feel hundreds of eyes around her, even if most weren't watching. She sat down on the wooden bench and took a slow, deep breath. The keys looked clean and bright under the light. She placed her hands gently on them, her fingers slightly shaking. For a few seconds, she couldn't move. The noise of the crowd faded in and out like waves crashing in her mind. Then she remembered the words of the woman who had invited her. Just something simple. Play what feels right. She started with a familiar melody, one she had learned as a child. It was light and easy, something people could recognize even in a busy place like this. The sound of the piano rose above the background noise, soft at first, then clearer. A few people nearby turned their heads. A child holding his mother's hand stopped walking and watched her curiously. At first, Alina tried to focus only on the notes. But as her fingers moved, her fear began to fade. The melody carried her away, and soon she forgot the crowd. Her hands started to flow naturally. She added small touches, gentle changes in rhythm, extra notes that gave the tune more warmth. She didn't plan it. It just happened. The simple song began to sound richer, deeper, filled with emotion that came from somewhere inside her heart. The station, once loud and busy, seemed to grow quieter. People nearby began to pause. One man who was about to board a train stopped by the piano, holding his suitcase in silence. A young couple sitting on a bench looked up, smiling softly. Even the workers behind the coffee stand leaned forward to listen. Alina didn't notice any of it. She was lost in her own world. Her fingers moved faster now, her eyes half closed as she poured years of unspoken feelings into the music. She remembered the little girl she once was, the piano in her old house, the dreams she had buried long ago. The melody became stronger, transforming from a simple tune into something powerful and full of life. For those watching, it felt as if time had stopped. The busy station became quiet except for the sound of her piano. The music was both gentle and fierce, carrying joy, sadness, and hope all at once. A woman holding a baby wiped a tear from her eye. Someone took out a phone and started recording. Others followed. Within minutes, dozens of people had gathered around, their faces calm and moved. When Alina finally played the last note, there was a long, deep silence. For a moment, she thought maybe no one had liked it. She sat there, her heart pounding, her hands still resting on the keys. Then the silence broke. Applause filled the air, echoing across the platform. People clapped loudly, some even cheered. The sound was so sudden that she almost jumped. She looked up in disbelief. Faces she had never seen before were smiling at her. Some nodded as if to thank her. A few shouted, "Bravo!" And that was beautiful. She felt her eyes sting with tears. She stood up slowly and gave a shy bow, her cheeks flushed. The event organizer came running over, clapping her hands. "That was incredible," she said, beaming. "You were supposed to play something simple, but that—" She paused, shaking her head with amazement. "That was something else entirely." Alina laughed nervously, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I didn't plan it," she said softly. "It just happened." "Well, whatever happened," the woman replied. "You made everyone here forget they were waiting for trains. You made them feel something." As the crowd slowly began to move again, a few people approached her. Some thanked her for the music. Others told her how much they enjoyed it. One older man even said, "You reminded me of my daughter. She used to play like that." His voice trembled slightly, and she smiled warmly, touched by his words. When the event ended, Alina stayed near the piano for a while, still trying to take in what had just happened. She looked around as people left, their faces calm and happy. For the first time in years, she felt proud of herself, not for being perfect, but for being brave enough to share her heart again. That evening, as she walked home through the cool air, the moment kept replaying in her mind. The sound of the applause, the smiles of strangers, the rush of emotion when she played, it all felt unreal. She didn't know it yet, but something important had shifted inside her. For so long she had lived quietly, working day after day, thinking her time had passed. But now it felt as though life had opened a small door for her again. When she reached her apartment, she sat by the window, looking out at the dark sky. She thought about her parents, her old piano, and the dream she had once given up. She whispered softly to herself, "Maybe it's not too late." The next morning, something extraordinary happened. Her phone buzzed with messages from people she didn't know. A friend from the cafe sent her a link with a short video. It was her performance from the train station, the same moment when she lost herself in music. Someone had uploaded it online, and it was already spreading fast. The video was titled, "Young Woman Turns a Simple Tune into Pure Magic at the Train Station." Her heart raced as she watched the clip. She could see herself sitting there, eyes half closed, completely absorbed in her playing. The camera shook a little, but the sound of her piano was clear and powerful. The comments were full of kind words, people saying they felt peace, joy, even tears while listening. Some wrote that her music made them remember their own forgotten dreams. She scrolled through the comments for hours, unable to believe what she was seeing. Her name, her face, people were sharing them everywhere. The local news page picked it up, calling her the mysterious station pianist. Even a popular radio station mentioned her performance, describing it as a reminder that beauty can appear in the most ordinary places. At first, she didn't know how to react. Part of her was thrilled, but another part felt shy and nervous. She wasn't used to attention. At the cafe, a few regular customers recognized her from the video. One of them smiled and said, "You're famous now." She laughed awkwardly, not knowing what to say. Later that week, she received an unexpected call from a woman who introduced herself as a representative of a local music organization. The woman said they wanted Alina to perform at an upcoming charity concert to raise funds for music education. "We saw your video," she said. "You have something special. Would you be interested in performing again?" Alina was silent for a moment. The idea of standing before an even bigger crowd scared her, but deep down she knew this was another chance, a door that life had opened for her. "Yes," she finally said. "I would love to." After the call ended, she sat quietly, thinking about how quickly everything had changed. Just days ago, she had been serving coffee, blending into the background of life. Now people wanted to hear her play. The world had noticed her not because she sought attention, but because she had been true to herself. That night, she returned to the community center. The janitor smiled when he saw her. "I saw the video," he said proudly. "Looks like the whole town knows who you are now." She smiled back, sitting down at the same old piano. The keys still felt the same, slightly uneven but full of character. She began to play again, not for fame, not for anyone else, but because it made her heart feel whole. As the melody filled the room, she closed her eyes and thought about everything that had happened. She didn't know where this path would lead, but one thing was clear. She had found her way back to music, and nothing in the world could take that away from her again. Outside the window, the night was calm. The sound of her piano drifted softly into the quiet streets. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed, its faint whistle blending with her tune, as if the world itself was listening, waiting for the next chapter of her story to begin. The week leading up to the charity concert was one of the most emotional and busy times of Alina's life. Everything felt new, uncertain, and exciting all at once. She couldn't believe how much had changed in just a few days. Strangers recognized her on the street. People at the cafe asked her questions about music, and her phone never seemed to stop ringing. Messages kept coming from people thanking her for her performance, telling her how much her music had touched their hearts. It was both overwhelming and beautiful. But behind all the excitement, she still felt nervous. The charity concert would be much bigger than the small platform at the train station. It was going to be held at the town's cultural center, a proper stage with bright lights, sound systems, and a crowd that would come just to listen to her play. That thought alone made her heart race every time she thought about it. At the community center, she continued to practice every evening. The same old piano that had once been her quiet escape was now her partner in preparation. Each note she played felt heavier, more meaningful. She knew people expected something special from her this time, and she didn't want to let them down. The janitor, who had become a quiet supporter, often sat nearby, listening while pretending to sweep the floor. "You've got something rare," he would say. "Don't hold back. Play like it's the last time you'll ever touch those keys." Sometimes she stayed there until late at night. The empty hall echoed with her music as she practiced different melodies, searching for the one that would truly speak to people's hearts. She didn't want to play something showy or complicated. She wanted to play something real, something that told her story without words. One night, as rain tapped against the windows, she sat staring at the piano keys, thinking deeply. Her fingers hovered above the notes, but she didn't play. Instead, she closed her eyes and let her thoughts drift. She thought of her father, who used to sit quietly in the corner listening to her practice. She thought of her mother humming softly in the kitchen, and of all the years she had buried her. Passion under daily routines. A wave of emotion rose within her, and before she knew it, her hands began to move on their own. The melody that came out was soft at first, fragile, like a whisper. But as she continued, it grew stronger, carrying the weight of everything she had ever felt. The sadness of giving up her dream, the quiet strength of surviving hard times, the hope of finding her music again, it all flowed through the piano. She didn't write it down, didn't plan it. It simply came from somewhere deep inside. When she finished, she sat there in silence, tears rolling down her cheeks. "This is the one," she whispered to herself. "This is what I'll play." The next few days passed quickly. Posters for the charity event appeared around town, and her name was printed in bold letters. Special performance by Alina, the station pianist. Every time she saw it, her stomach flipped. At the cafe, her coworkers teased her kindly, saying they would be in the audience cheering for her. Even some of the regular customers promised to come. The night before the concert, she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about every moment that had led her here. She was grateful, nervous, and full of anticipation. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But she knew one thing for sure. She was going to play her heart out. The next morning, sunlight filtered through her curtains and she woke up with a strange calmness. She spent the day quietly, drinking tea, walking around her small apartment, humming the tune she had written. She practiced it one last time in her mind, her fingers moving over an imaginary keyboard. When evening came, she arrived early at the cultural center. The hall was beautiful, wide polished floors, velvet curtains, and rows of empty chairs that would soon be filled. Technicians adjusted the lights and sound, and other performers moved around, chatting nervously. Alina stood near the side of the stage, her heart pounding as she watched them. A kind stage manager approached her. "You're the one from the station video, right?" he asked with a friendly smile. She nodded shyly. "Yes, that's me. Don't worry," he said, sensing her nerves. "You'll do great. Everyone's been talking about you all week. They're really looking forward to hearing you play." She smiled, though inside she felt both comforted and pressured. She didn't want to disappoint anyone. As the seats began to fill, the sound of voices grew louder. Families, couples, and even elderly people took their places. The hall buzzed with anticipation. When the lights dimmed, the host walked on stage to welcome everyone. The event began with a few local singers and a children's choir. Alina watched from backstage, her hands cold and her breath shallow. Every performance before hers made her more aware that her turn was coming. Finally, the host smiled and announced, "And now, a very special performance by the young woman who captured our hearts at the train station. A pianist whose music reminded us that beauty can be found anywhere. Please welcome Alina." Her name echoed through the hall. She stepped out slowly, her shoes making soft sounds on the wooden stage. The audience applauded warmly as she walked toward the grand piano at the center. The lights were bright, almost blinding, but she could feel the kindness in the room. She sat down, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a deep breath. Her fingers rested gently on the keys. The hall fell silent. Then she began to play. The first notes were quiet, delicate, like falling rain. Each sound shimmered softly through the hall, reaching every ear, every heart. As the melody grew, so did her confidence. The music flowed effortlessly, filled with emotion, carrying the story of her journey without a single word. The audience listened in silence. Some leaned forward in their seats, completely still. Her music spoke of hope, struggle, love, and rediscovery. It was as if the piano itself was telling the story of her life. At one point, her eyes opened and she looked out at the audience. She could see faces lit by the soft glow of the stage lights. Some people had their eyes closed. Others had tears shining on their cheeks. In that moment, she realized she wasn't just playing notes, she was sharing a part of her soul. When the final chord faded, there was a long pause. Then the hall erupted in applause, louder and longer than she had ever imagined. People stood up, clapping and cheering. She looked around, overwhelmed, her heart full. She stood and bowed, tears in her eyes. The host returned to the stage, shaking her hand. "That was truly special," he said into the microphone. "You've given us something we'll never forget." Backstage, the other performers congratulated her. Some hugged her, others simply smiled, speechless. The woman who had invited her to the first event was there too, her eyes wet. "You've come so far, my dear," she said softly. That was pure emotion. "You made everyone feel something real tonight." Alina smiled, unable to find words. She felt lighter than ever before. For the first time in years, she didn't doubt herself. She knew that music wasn't just something she did. It was a part of who she was. Later that night, when she returned home, she sat by the window again, looking out at the quiet street below. The applause still echoed in her ears. Her phone buzzed non-stop with messages, but she didn't open them yet. Instead, she leaned back and let the peace of the moment fill her. She thought about how far she had come, from a tired cafe worker who thought her dreams were gone, to a woman who had moved an entire audience with her music. And she knew this was only the beginning. There were still many stories left to tell through her piano. As she closed her eyes, she smiled softly. She wasn't chasing fame or success anymore. She just wanted to keep sharing her heart, one melody at a time. Outside, the town was quiet, but somewhere in that silence, it felt as though the world was listening. The lights of the city twinkled faintly, and the night breeze carried a calm promise, a promise that this was just the start of a journey that would change her life, forever. The next morning arrived with a soft, golden light pouring through the window of the small apartment. She sat up in bed, rubbing her tired eyes. The echo of last night's piano performance still lingered in her mind. It wasn't just the melody, it was the feeling of freedom she had tasted, the rare moment when she was truly herself. But along with that memory came a flood of questions. What would people think now? Would the video of her playing spread? Would she be invited again? Or worse, would they think she had been pretending all along? As she got ready for the day, the messages started coming in. Her phone buzzed continuously. Her friends from the conservatory, her old classmates, and even a few people she hadn't spoken to in years were sending her messages. Some were congratulating her, saying they had seen a clip of her performance online. Someone had recorded the entire thing and posted it on a social platform. The video was gaining thousands of views overnight. The title read, "Waitress surprises everyone by playing the piano like a pro." She stared at the screen, her hands trembling. Her heart raced, not out of fear but disbelief. In the video, she looked calm and lost in the melody, while the crowd behind her watched in silence, some with their mouths open, others recording in awe. She could almost feel that moment again, each note, each pause, each emotion flowing through her. But not all comments were kind. Some people accused her of faking it, saying it was impossible for a waitress to play like that. Others claimed it was staged, a publicity stunt. A few recognized her from the music school she once attended, and they confirmed that she was indeed a talented pianist who had vanished after leaving the conservatory. Seeing her name back in public again made her uneasy. Later that day, when she went to work, the atmosphere in the restaurant was completely different. People looked at her differently now. Some smiled, others whispered as she passed by. A few customers even asked to take photos with her. It was strange being noticed for something that once felt so private. The restaurant manager called her into the office. She walked in nervously, unsure what to expect. But instead of a reprimand, the manager smiled warmly. "You've brought a lot of attention to our place," he said. "People are coming just to see the piano where you played. It's good for business, but also, well, it's good for you. You've got something special." His words warmed her heart, but she didn't know how to respond. She just nodded and thanked him quietly. Deep down, she wasn't chasing fame or recognition. She only wanted to express what she felt through music. That was always enough for her. That night after her shift, she sat alone at the piano again. The lights were dim and the restaurant was closed. She pressed a few soft notes, letting them echo in the stillness. It was her way of breathing after a long day. Music was the only place she felt completely safe. As she played, the door opened and she saw an older woman standing there, a guest she remembered from the previous performance. The woman approached with a gentle smile and said, "I knew you weren't an ordinary player. The way you touched the keys, it came from a place of real pain and beauty. You should never hide that." The woman introduced herself as a retired music teacher who used to attend local performances. She told her that talent like hers shouldn't stay hidden in a restaurant. "You have a gift," she said softly, "and the world deserves to hear it." Those words stayed with her long after the woman left. She had heard encouragement before, but this time it felt different. Maybe it was because she was finally ready to listen. Days passed and the video continued to spread online. A small local news channel reached out to feature her story. They wanted to know how a simple waitress had stunned a crowd with such passion. She was hesitant at first. She wasn't used to cameras or interviews, but the manager encouraged her to go ahead. "It's your moment," he said kindly. During the interview, she spoke simply and humbly. She shared how she had been trained in classical piano, but had to leave her studies to support her family. She talked about the challenges of balancing survival with her dreams. Her honesty touched people. The interviewer noticed the emotion in her voice when she said, "Music is not about fame. It's about feeling something real and sharing it, even when life doesn't give you much room to do so." After the interview aired, something remarkable happened. Messages poured in from people who were inspired by her story. Single mothers, young musicians who had given up, and people who had lost faith in their own dreams. They told her how her courage and simplicity reminded them not to give up. She read each message carefully, sometimes with tears in her eyes. But not everything was easy. With attention came pressure. People began expecting more from her. New performances, collaborations, and invitations to perform in small local events. She didn't have much time to prepare, and fear of failure crept in. What if she wasn't as good as they thought? What if that magical moment was just luck? One evening, she sat by the piano again, her fingers hesitating above the keys. Her confidence wavered, and she remembered all the times she was told she wasn't good enough. But then she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to play. The notes came slowly at first, uncertain and fragile, but soon they grew stronger. Each melody reminded her why she started. That night, a small group of people gathered outside the restaurant to listen. Someone had left the door slightly open, and the music floated out into the cool night air. The people didn't say a word. They just listened. For her, it wasn't a performance, it was a confession, a conversation between her and the keys. When the last note faded, she looked up and saw a few people clapping quietly from outside. One of them called out, "That was beautiful!" And she smiled shyly. It wasn't fame she felt, it was connection. Over the next few weeks, she began playing more often at the restaurant, not just after closing, but during quiet hours when customers were seated. People started coming not for the food, but for the music. Some evenings, families sat together smiling, while others just closed their eyes and let the music wash over them. The owner even bought her a better piano, saying she deserved it. For the first time in years, she felt truly appreciated, not as a waitress, but as an artist. Still, deep down, she knew this was just the beginning. Something inside her was awakening. The courage she had lost was returning. Each song she played felt like another step toward the dream she had buried long ago. One evening, as she wiped down tables after her shift, a man approached her. He was quiet, dressed neatly, and carried a small notebook. He introduced himself as a music producer who had seen her story online. He said her performance had moved him deeply, and he wanted to talk about something. Her heart skipped a beat. She listened carefully as he explained that he was organizing a small charity concert to raise funds for underprivileged children who wanted to learn music. He thought her story would inspire others and wanted her to perform at the event. At first, she hesitated. The idea of standing on a stage again after all these years terrified her. But the way he spoke about helping others through music touched her deeply. He wasn't offering fame, he was offering purpose. That night, she couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the opportunity. It felt like life was giving her another chance, not just to play, but to make a difference. She looked at her old piano in the corner of her room and smiled faintly. Maybe it was time to step back into the world she once left behind. With that thought, she whispered softly to herself, "Maybe this is where the music really begins." And as the moonlight spilled across her piano keys, she touched them gently, letting a quiet melody rise in the stillness, a promise to herself that she would no longer hide her gift. The day of the charity concert came closer with every sunrise, and her heart felt heavier yet strangely alive. She had agreed to perform, but it didn't feel real until now. The music producer who had approached her a few weeks earlier stayed in contact, helping her prepare. He arranged a small team, a pianist from another city to help with rehearsals, and even offered her time off from the restaurant so she could focus on the performance. The event wasn't going to be huge. It would take place in a medium-sized community hall that could fit around 200 people. But to her, it felt like standing at the edge of a mountain she wasn't sure she could climb. Every evening after hours of practice, she sat by her small window and thought about how far she had come. Only months ago, she was serving food, collecting plates, and wondering if anyone would ever hear her play again. Now people were waiting to listen to her. The idea made her nervous, but also filled her with a quiet kind of pride. On one of the rehearsal days, the producer brought in a small group of local musicians, a violinist, a guitarist, and a young singer. They would accompany her during one of the final songs. She had never played with others before, not like this. It felt different, but it also reminded her how music connects people who barely know each other. As they played together for the first time, she could feel something beautiful forming. The music wasn't perfect, but it was alive. Each instrument had a voice, and together, they told a story that words couldn't describe. The violin carried emotion, the guitar added warmth, and her piano held them all together like an invisible thread. After the rehearsal ended, the young singer turned to her and said softly, "When you play, it feels like you're telling a story from your heart." She smiled shyly, her fingers still resting on the keys. "That's the only way I know how to play," she replied. As the concert day came closer, the local media began to talk about the event. Many people remembered her from the viral video months ago. They were curious to see her perform live for the first time. Tickets sold faster than expected, and soon the hall was fully booked. The night before the performance, she couldn't sleep. She kept pacing around her small apartment, checking her notes and practicing parts of her piece over and over again. Her heart raced every time she imagined walking onto that stage. She wasn't afraid of the piano. She was afraid of being seen again, afraid of the emotions that would come when she played in front of so many people. She sat at her piano, lit only by a small lamp, and whispered to herself, "You've done this before. You just need to breathe." She took a deep breath and started playing the opening of her chosen piece, a soft, emotional melody she had written herself, inspired by her own struggles. Each note felt like a memory. The years of silence, the long nights after work, the dreams she had almost let go of. When she finished, tears filled her eyes. She wasn't sure if it was fear or gratitude, but she knew she was ready. The next evening, the concert hall buzzed with quiet excitement. Families, musicians, and even strangers who had watched her viral video filled the seats. The lights dimmed and soft murmurs filled the room. Behind the stage curtain, she stood in her simple dress, hands clasped tightly together. She could hear the producer giving a short introduction about her journey, a waitress with a hidden gift who had reminded people that talent can bloom anywhere. When he called her name, she took one small step forward, then another. The stage lights were bright, almost blinding, but the moment she saw the piano, everything else disappeared. It wasn't a crowd anymore. It was just her and the instrument she loved. She sat down, closed her eyes, and took a deep breath. Then she began to play. The first notes echoed softly through the hall. Her fingers moved with grace and purpose, not rushed, but full of emotion. The music started slow, telling a quiet story of struggle and loneliness, then grew stronger, filled with hope and fire. Every sound that came from the piano felt like a piece of her heart being shared. As she played, she forgot about the crowd. She wasn't performing anymore. She was reliving her life through the keys. She remembered the times she had almost given up, the kindness of strangers who encouraged her, and the peace she always found in music. At one point, she opened her eyes and saw the audience. Some were sitting completely still, others wiping tears. It gave her courage. She smiled faintly and let the final notes of the piece rise softly, like a whisper fading into the night. The moment she finished, there was silence. Deep, pure silence. Then the entire hall erupted in applause. People stood up, clapping, cheering, and some even shouting her name. She felt her chest tighten with emotion. She didn't bow right away. She just sat there for a moment, overwhelmed, her eyes glistening. The other musicians joined her on stage for the final song. Together they played a heartfelt tune that filled the hall with warmth. The young singer's voice blended beautifully with the melody, and she could feel the energy of the crowd lifting higher with every chord. By the time the concert ended, the applause felt endless. The producer came on stage and shook her hand, smiling proudly. "You've done something special tonight," he said. "You've reminded everyone what real music feels like." Afterward, many people came to meet her. Some thanked her, some asked for photos, and a few shared how her music reminded them of their own struggles. One woman said, "Your story gives me hope. I thought it was too late to follow my dreams, but now I want to try again." Hearing those words made her eyes fill with tears again. Later that night, when everyone had left and the hall was empty, she walked back onto the stage. The piano stood quietly under the dim light, and she placed her hand gently on it. It wasn't just an instrument to her. It was her voice, her companion through all the pain and joy. She sat down one last time and played a soft tune, just for herself. There were no cameras, no audience, only her and the sound that seemed to wrap around her like an embrace. As the final note faded, she whispered, "Thank you." She wasn't sure if she was thanking the piano, the people, or life itself, but she meant it with her whole heart. The next few days changed everything. The concert had been recorded, and clips of her performance began to spread online. This time it wasn't just local. People from different countries shared it, calling her the waitress who played from the soul. Music blogs wrote about her story, and small radio stations played her performance. The producer received calls from music schools and event organizers who wanted to invite her to play again. She was overwhelmed by the attention, but grateful. Every opportunity felt like a new door opening after years of being closed. But she didn't rush. She still went to the restaurant, still greeted customers with the same gentle smile, still played after closing time. She didn't want to lose the simplicity that had always grounded her. One evening, the older woman who had first encouraged her returned to the restaurant. She walked up to her and said, "You see, the world needed your music. You've touched hearts you've never even met." She smiled, humbled, and replied, "It still feels like a dream." The woman nodded and said, "It's real, and it's only the beginning." That night she went home and sat by her piano again. She didn't play anything grand, just a soft, simple melody, the kind she used to play when no one was watching. But this time it sounded different. It carried peace, not pain. It carried hope. She realized that music had brought her full circle, from a young girl dreaming of the stage, to a woman who had lived through struggle and found her way back to the sound that made her feel alive. Her journey wasn't over, but she no longer feared what was ahead. Whatever came next, she knew she would face it with the same heart that had carried her through everything. And as the quiet night wrapped around her, she smiled softly and whispered, "This time, I won't stop playing." Weeks passed after the charity concert, yet the glow of that evening stayed with her. Every now and then she replayed small moments in her mind, the sound of the applause, the warm smiles of strangers, and the deep peace she felt as the final note faded. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a turning point, a reminder that even after losing everything, she had found herself again through music. Life, however, didn't suddenly become perfect. There were still bills to pay, long shifts at the restaurant, and days when exhaustion stole her energy. But now everything felt lighter. The heaviness she had carried in her heart for so long had slowly started to lift. The restaurant had even placed a small framed picture of her concert performance near the entrance with a simple caption underneath, "Our pianist with a story that touched hearts." People often noticed it and smiled, recognizing her immediately when she came to serve their tables. Sometimes, guests asked her to play a short tune during quieter hours. She always agreed. For her, playing wasn't about fame. It was about sharing something real, something that could bring peace even for a few moments. One quiet evening, as she played softly near the corner of the restaurant, a man walked in with a calm, thoughtful look. He listened for a while before approaching her after the song ended. He introduced himself as a representative from a well-known music foundation. They had seen her charity performance and wanted to offer her a chance to join a mentoring program, one that supported talented musicians who had faced hardships but still carried passion in their hearts. At first, she didn't know how to respond. It sounded too good to be true. But when he handed her a letter of invitation and explained that the foundation would help her record her own music and even teach other aspiring artists, she felt something stir inside. This wasn't just another performance opportunity. It was a way to give back, to help others find their own voice through music, just as she had. The following weeks were filled with change. She divided her time between the restaurant and the foundation's small studio. There she met others like herself, people who had once dreamed of music but were forced to put those dreams aside because of life's struggles. Some were younger, filled with hope but lacking guidance. Others were older, trying to find courage again after years away from their instruments. She fit right in. Instead of feeling like a performer, she felt like a bridge, someone who understood both the pain of giving up and the joy of starting again. The studio became her second home. Her first project was to record a few of her own compositions, the ones she had written in silence over the years. She spent long hours in the small recording room, lost in the sound of her piano, rewriting, adjusting, and pouring her heart into every piece. The producer encouraged her to play as she felt, not as the notes dictated. And when she did, something magical happened. Her music began to sound more alive, more human. One of her songs, a slow and emotional piece that she titled The Long Way Home, was uploaded on the Foundation's online platform. Within days, thousands of people listened to it. Comments poured in from listeners around the world. Some said the song felt like hope after sadness. Others said it made them cry in a way that felt healing. Reading those words, she felt an indescribable warmth. For so long, she had played for herself, not knowing if her music mattered to anyone else. Now she realized it did, deeply. As months passed, she began mentoring young students at the Foundation. She wasn't the type to give strict lessons. Instead, she told stories. She shared how she once had to choose between survival and her dream, how she spent years wiping tables but never let her heart forget the sound of the piano. The students listened to her with admiration and sometimes with tears. One afternoon, a young boy who had lost confidence in his playing sat beside her, frustrated. "I keep making mistakes," he said. "Maybe I'm not meant for this." She smiled gently and said, "Do you think I never made mistakes? Music isn't about perfection. It's about feeling something and sharing it. Even broken notes can sound beautiful when they're honest." The boy looked at her, then smiled slowly. He tried again, and though the melody was imperfect, it was full of heart. She nodded proudly. That moment reminded her why she had accepted this new path. Months turned into a year, and her name began to appear in small music articles. The waitress who became an inspiration. She didn't seek attention, but people were drawn to her humility and the emotional truth of her music. Local events invited her to perform, and she always made sure to end each show with words of encouragement for anyone who had ever felt invisible. Despite the growing recognition, she never let success change her. She still lived in her small apartment, still walked to work when she had shifts at the restaurant, and still played softly at night when no one was around. The simplicity of her life kept her grounded. One morning she received an unexpected letter. It was from a prestigious conservatory, the very same one she had once left behind when her life had fallen apart. They had seen her story and invited her to perform as a guest artist for their annual student showcase. The idea of returning there made her heart race. It was where everything had begun, and where she had once believed her dreams had ended. When the day came, she stood backstage at the conservatory hall, the same one she had walked out of years ago. Everything felt familiar. The polished floor, the echo of footsteps, the smell of freshly tuned pianos. Yet she was different now. She wasn't the scared young woman who once doubted herself. She was someone who had lived, fallen, and risen again through her music. As she stepped onto the stage, she looked at the audience, students, teachers, and guests, and took a deep breath. Once, she began softly, "I thought this place was the end of my story. But I was wrong. Sometimes the journey just takes a longer road than we expect." She sat at the piano and began to play The Long Way Home. The melody filled the hall with quiet emotion, each note flowing like a story told without words. She played not to impress but to connect, and when the final note faded, the entire hall stood in applause. Some of her old teachers even had tears in their eyes. That night after the event, she walked outside into the cool air, feeling peaceful. The city lights shimmered, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to dream again, not of fame but of growth, of giving, of living through music. In the weeks that followed, she continued performing, teaching, and writing. Her compositions began to appear in small films and online playlists. But no matter how far she went, she always made time to visit the restaurant where everything had started. She never forgot the small stage in the corner, the old piano that had once given her courage to play again. One evening, as she played softly in that same corner, the restaurant was quiet. The light above her shone warm and gentle. The air felt full of peace. A young couple sitting nearby whispered to each other, and she overheard the woman say, "That's her, the one from the video." She smiled to herself but kept playing. She didn't need words or recognition anymore. The music said everything. When she finished, the manager, now a dear friend, approached her and said, "You've come a long way. I'm proud of you. She looked up, her eyes soft and full of gratitude. I wouldn't be here without this place, she said quietly. It all started right here. That night, as she walked home under the calm glow of the streetlights, she felt the weight of every step, not heavy, but full of meaning. Life had tested her in every way, but it had also led her back to her purpose. When she reached home, she sat at her piano, the same old one that had stayed with her through it all. She placed her hands gently on the keys and began to play a new melody, one that sounded like peace, like healing, like home. And as the final note lingered softly in the air, she closed her eyes and smiled. Her journey had begun with silence, grown through struggle, and now rested in harmony. She didn't need the world to remember her name. It was enough that her music lived on, honest, simple, and full of heart. For her, that was the truest kind of success. Not applause, not fame, but knowing that somewhere, someone might hear her song and feel a little less alone.